Well, good afternoon to those of you here at the sanctuary at Berean Tabernacle, and to all of you who are on our social media platform. We certainly do welcome you to our Wednesday afternoon Pastor's Bible study. On this afternoon, we'll be looking at the book of Lamentations, and the third chapter. We'll be beginning in verse 19. The book of Lamentations, the third chapter, beginning with verse 19. I'm not sure about you, but I have really enjoyed the study of the book of Jeremiah. It has so much truth in it and so many points of wisdom that I think that it would almost take a lifetime to gather all the truth and all of the information that he has in this particular book of Jeremiah. It has certainly been a help to me. In this book of Lamentations, Jeremiah is sharing with his reading audiences some of the afflictions and some of the sorrows that he was experiencing. He's sharing his pain and his hurt and his brokenness as we have looked for the last several weeks, how Jeremiah was at a crossroads with how could this happen to God's people. He was looking at the destruction and the devastation that had overtaken Jerusalem, the city of God, the holy city, the city of David, Zion. And he could not believe that God had permitted the Babylonians to come and to destroy the city. And as he looked at the ruins, as he looked at the decay, it brought tears to his eyes. And the entire book of Jeremiah is a catalog of his struggles, his preaching and his prayers, and the things that he did to get the people who were left behind to put their trust in God. The book of Lamentations is just a documentation of some of the sorrows that he had. And when we begin to look at this third chapter, particularly in the first 12 verses, Jeremiah understood one thing that I'm not sure that we have quite gotten a grip on yet and an understanding of. Jeremiah knew this one thing. He knew that nothing could happen to God's people without God's permission or his prescription. We've said that before. Nothing could happen to God's people without his permission or his prescription, his prescriptive will. And it reminds me of the book of Job. We read how Satan attacked Job and took his health and took his family, took his cattle, took his crops, took his house, even took his health. But the Bible said, in the midst of all of that, Job did not sin. But he said something that I think every child of God needs to be aware of and need to meditate on. Job said this to God: though you slay me. In other words, he was able to see beyond the footprints of Satan and see God's permissive will. Let me say that again. Job was able to look beyond Satan operating in his life, Satan active in his life, Satan destroying. He looked beyond that and he was able to see and have a perspective on God's prescriptive or permissive will, and said, though you slay me. Satan cannot do anything without getting first permission from God. Now, that busts a whole lot of people theology, because when you listen carefully today, and I'm grateful for the praises that go up in the church, and I'm grateful for all of the blessings and all of the great times that we have in the Lord and shouting out of the power of the Holy Spirit. But I also know there's another side to God. There's another side to God. God doesn't play. And what happened to the children of Israel? They had turned their backs on God. And because of the consequences of that, they experienced some difficult moments. The Babylonians laid siege to the city of Jerusalem. It was totally destroyed. And Jeremiah suffered. I really believe that God is waiting for the church. And it may well be that the book of Lamentations might be a study for the church to meditate on. Because there's sometimes we are so busy shouting, we can't think about what we need to be grieved over. There is a lot of grief around us. If you don't believe it, turn on your television set. And what I've read and what you have read, and I think one of the phrases that you need to probably memorize, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted. I think about that, Deke. I think about that statement. We shout here on Sunday morning and we have much to shout about. But what about the people who are suffering? What are we going to do on their behalf? Are we empathic with them? Are we sympathetic with these people? Because, you know, the only way that we can minister to people, we have to identify with their pain. We have to identify with their struggles. And I'm not so sure that sometimes God does not permit us to have pain and struggles and brokenness in our lives so that we can be able to minister to others. And there are moments I question sometimes, as a pastor, I like to see people shouting, but I question that maybe sometimes we need to leave church crying. Maybe not for our own pain, but for the pain of others. Just a thought. Or do we have to be afflicted in order to understand the affliction of others? I'm not sure about that. But listen, let's look at just briefly the text beginning in Lamentations, the 3rd chapter, just beginning in verse 1. He says, I am the man who has seen what? Affliction. You need to underline that. You need to underline that. It may explain why you have gone through what you have gone through or what you are going through right now. God is saying, how can you pray for others when you don't even know what to pray for? You've never been there. That is beyond your existential experience. The Bible says about Jesus, he was in all points tempted as we are, yet he was without sin. He experienced the pain, the betrayal, the denial, the backbiting, the destruction. He experienced it all so that when we pray to him, he knows if nobody else knows the pain. Listen to what Jeremiah was experiencing. You might be able to identify with some of it. Verse 1, I am the man who has seen affliction. by the rod of his wrath. God will forgive you. As a matter of fact, God, know this, God has already forgiven you. He's forgiven us, but there are still consequences that you must suffer. Oh, he's forgiven you. Yes, he has. But he's going to allow us to suffer the consequences. And there are some lessons out of the affliction. Listen to what Jeremiah said in the moment of his sorrow. Verse 2, I was driven away and made me walk in darkness. He has driven me away. He, who is the he? God. God has what? Driven me away. Do you know that could be a blessing? Because God, you get too close to God in your sins, he'll take you out. There were two priests in the Old Testament offered strange fire before the Lord. And when they went before the Lord with a strange fire, God said, I don't recognize what you're doing. He took them out. But at least on Jeremiah's part, the people part, he says, I'm not going to take you out, but I'm going to drive you away. He drove them away. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was the one that tore the city down, but it was God who authorized it. It was God who permitted it. It was God who prescribed it. That old theologian that said, you don't miss your water until the well runs dry. I don't know what prophet said that, but you know it was a truth. Sometimes we don't appreciate God. Sometimes we don't appreciate God until he has driven us away. The prodigal son didn't appreciate the father until he was in the pig pen and said, my father's hired servants live better than what I'm doing. Then he began to what? Appreciate and have gratitude for where he was. Maybe sometimes that's why we have to suffer sometimes. God is teaching us how to be grateful for what we have. He has made, look at verse 4, he has made my skin and my flesh grow old and has broken my bones. He has besieged me and surrounded me with what? Bitterness and hardship. And he has made me dwell in darkness. God behind this. And this blows some people theology because there's a group, and I don't want to call any name. I don't want to disparage anybody's religion and faith. But I question when it's always praise. The old preachers used to say, if they don't leave mad with you, you haven't preached. And we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful about this because, yes, he wants us to rejoice, but more than anything, he wants us to know him. And he wants us to prepare the people for what we got to go through. Well, drop down to verse 19. You can read verses 1 through 18 as Jeremiah is sharing his sorrow. But beginning in verse 19, he said something very remarkable. He says, I remember my affliction and my wandering. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. A real struggle. Now, this is God's prophet. This is the man of God. This is the instrument in God's hand. but look at what he's going through. That's why I always told you, those who are quick to take a shingle and put it on their door and call themselves prophet, you better be careful of that. Everybody with a shingle on their door calling themselves bishop is not necessarily ordained by God. Look at what this man went through. I've heard T.D. Jakes tell the story of a young man, young preacher, who told him, he said, I want to have your anointing. And Jake says, you really don't want this because you have no idea of what it costs me. You remember the sons of Boanerges when they went to Jesus and the mother came, he said, I want my sons to sit on your left hand and your right hand. I want them to have position. And Jesus said, you don't know what you're asking. But then he looked at him and says, you will be baptized with the baptism I've been baptized with. That means pain, affliction, a lot of sorrow, a lot of brokenness. You really don't know what people go through in order to get where they are. Jeremiah is sharing some of this. And I'm saying this to us because it does not necessarily mean that God has turned his back on you. There's some things God sometimes has to test us to see where we are. Sometimes God allows these things to come into our lives so that he can strengthen us. Sometimes he allows these things to come into our lives so we can see him heal us. Not just read about it and preach about it, but to experience it. I've shared with you guys many times my experience in the hospital. And standing in this same pulpit talking about he's going to heal you. He's a healer. By his stripes we'll heal. Preaching that, we shouting until I got in that hospital bed. And those doctors looking at my legs and thinking about cutting them off. And looking at that hole in my leg that was not healing. I began to pray for healing and I saw what God did. So when I talk about healing now, it's not about what I read. It's what I've been through. And that's why you've always heard me say this as I'm preaching. I just don't want you to hear me. I want you to what? Feel me. Been there. Well, look at what's going on here. Verse 20, I will remember them and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind. Yet, see, circle that word yet. See? Yet. All this he's going through. For 20 verses, the pain, the affliction, the brokenness, the sorrow, the tears, for 20 verses. But then verse 21, he starts out what? Yet. You see that, Candace? It doesn't matter. There's a contradiction. Yet God, yet what? This I call to mind. This I call to mind. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but God delivers them from them all. And I would challenge you right now that when we're going through those moments of affliction, that we remember what God did for us. I always tell the preachers, don't stand up there and preach about something you have not experienced. Find something you've experienced, because the moment you talk about something that you have experienced, there are always people out there who will know immediately you don't know what you're talking about. And I like verse 21. Yet This I call to mind, and therefore I have what? I have hope. I call to mind all these things. I haven't forgotten. But I still what? Have hope. Now this is a preaching thing here. This is a preaching word here. After all you have been through, do you still hope in God? After all you've seen, after all you experienced, have you? And many times I believe that's what part of Satan's strategy in our lives, to make us lose hope. But through it all, he said, I still. Can you see him now? I want you to picture him in your mind, looking at the devastation, looking at the destruction, the burned walls, the torn down temple, the empty houses where people would have been brought off, looking at all of that mess and say, yet I still have hope. Yet I still have hope. It's a challenge to us today. Marge and I were having coffee this afternoon, and it came to my mind the prayer of Jabez. It came distinctively into my mind. God told Jabez, he said, stretch forth your tent. Stretch forth your tent. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. We have been looking at it as a word of prosperity, and it probably was a word of prosperity. God says, I want you to, I want you to grow. But it also may be a challenge for us for mission. When God is saying, increase your capacity. You don't have enough chairs. But Lord, they're empty. Yes, but I'm telling you, put some more chairs. Put some more chairs in the sanctuary. Now that's a faith call, isn't it? It requires a faith operation. God told me this, but buy 300 more chairs and put in here. Build a balcony in here. But Lord, but Pastor, I don't know. We walk by what? We walk by what? We say it, but do we live it? Because God says, I'm fixing to send them from the north, the south, and the east, and the west. And if you don't have the capacity to hold them, I got to send them somewhere else. Y'all didn't get that. I'm going to be looking for a place where I can send them. But if you don't have the capacity to love them, if you don't have the capacity to take care of them, I've got to send them somewhere else where they will be loved. Look at your neighbor, if you don't mind. Those of you who are on, I'm preaching now. I got to get, but that speaks loudly. It speaks loudly to the church today. Do we have that kind of faith? Jeremiah had that kind of faith when he says, yet I call to mind, and therefore I still have hope. I haven't given up hope. I'm 73 years old. Have not given up hope. Please be patient with me. God is not through with me yet. Do you see this in the text? Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassion never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will what? Wait. The Lord is my portion. That means that I have put everything in the Lord's hand. I have put everything in his jurisdiction, under his authority. And if I sink, I sink. Deke mentioned that a few minutes ago in his prayer, I think, about the three Hebrew boys. When the three Hebrew boys said, if he doesn't take care of me, I still gonna. I put everything in his hands, and that's what Jeremiah said. The Lord is my portion. If I have destruction, it means that that's what he's permitted. If I have prosperity, that means that's what he wanted. It's no longer I, but it's Christ that lives in me. It's God that is in control of my life. That's why he says here, therefore will I wait. I will wait because I really don't know what the Lord is going to do. Isaiah 55. We don't know what God is about to do. I know one thing, he sustained us. Had it not been for the Lord on our side, he could have closed this place down a long time ago. But we've been here by the grace of God. I've seen him do some things that will knock the socks off you. So that means that God is still with us. But he wants to see our faith. He wants to see our faith. He wants to see you. He wants to see your faith. Well, where's your faith? I may have to preach that. Stretch forth your tent. What do you mean? You're not doing enough. Do more. Do more. The man of God in the Old Testament ran across the widow. Her husband had died. They didn't have very much meal and very little oil. And she told the man of God. The man said, I know your barrel is empty, but go get more. Go get more barrels. Go get more, get as many empty barrels as you can. What is that telling you? Increase your capacity. Because when the oil begins to flow, it's not just going to flow on you. He says, I'm going to fill up every barrel in the house. I don't know, but I might be getting ready. We might be getting ready to stretch ourselves, Berean. I don't know. I might be able to sanctuary over there. Just a handful of people. The Lord told me. He told me to do this. And guess what we're sitting in? Now that's faith. That's what faith is all about. Faith is just shouting here at the altar, waving our hands. That's not really faith. That's praise. But it ain't necessarily faith. But what it is, faith, is the hope against hope. That's what Abraham demonstrated. Hope against hope. When God tells you to do something, and it's going to be, whenever God tells you to do something, it's going to be demanding. Look at here. Look at here. He says, I'm going to wait on him. I'm going to wait on him. There's a curious story in the Old Testament. God had anointed King Saul to be king over the covenant people of Israel, the children of Israel. And Samuel, the old prophet, told Saul, I want you to prepare for battle, but I want you to wait on me. Don't go to battle until I get there. It's going to take me 7 days to get there, and I'll be there to offer sacrifice before you go to battle. Well, the seventh day came. Samuel hadn't showed up. King Saul decided that since Samuel did not show up, he went in to the temple and he offered sacrifices that he was not authorized. And as a result, he lost his kingdom. He got out of his lane. Why? Simply because he couldn't wait on the man of God. I hear Della singing now. Don't mind. Don't mind. How many of y'all, well, don't look straight ahead. Don't answer the question. This is a rhetorical question. How many of y'all can know how to wait on God? How many of us know how to wait on God? Old saints would put it this way: he may not come when you want him, but he's always on time. There are what is called those kairos moments. Kairos moments is when the eternal steps into the chronos, into the time. When the internal power and the eternal promises steps into time, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son when it was time. Sometimes we ask God for stuff, it ain't time yet. Either you're not ready for it, or he has not gotten the circumstances ready for it. I asked him, said, Lord, why did you wait 75 years before you start dealing with Abraham? He says, because I had to wait for the right time. When it was no possibility for him to do it in his flesh. When it was no possibility for Sarah to do it in her flesh. That's what I stepped in. Man's extremity is God's opportunity. Sometimes God waits to the last moment so that you will know who did it. And it's up to us to have the ability, the strength, the faith. I'm just going to wait on God. In my personality, I've had to learn that lesson the hard way. Almost 40 some years of pastoral ministry. I'll share this with you and we'll be through. And those of you who are on social media now, if you have any questions, put them in the chat room and we'll try to address some of those questions. But as a child, I used to play the little soldiers, and I would have wars, and the United States would always win. And I learned how to make it happen. Make it happen. That's what the Star Wars movie. And God doesn't do that. He says, stand still. He says he didn't, and I've done things. God showed me things, and he didn't tell me when to do it. He just showed it to me to let you know it's coming. And I got out ahead. And I said, Lord, what happened? I know you showed me that. He said, I didn't tell you to do it. I just was trying to teach you and show you what's about to happen so that you can be prepared. I didn't tell you to do it because you can't do it. And I didn't tell you about it because I'm going to do it. Anybody ever had an experience like that? You've gotten ahead of God. You thought, y'all looking at me a little strange. What about y'all there on social media? You thought you were doing what God told you to do. But God said, I didn't tell you to do that. You can't fix your own life. How you going to fix the life of your parishioners? Y'all don't hear me. There's some things you got to let God take care of and keep your hands off of it. And I hear God right now saying, if you take your hands off of it, I'll fix it. But as long as you got your hands on the problem, God says, if I fix it, you're going to think you did it. How many of y'all trust God enough? Let me see your hands. Those of you, send me something. Send me something on there on social media. How many of you trust God that much to take your hands off of it? Stop trying to fix stuff that you cannot fix and wait on God. And then when that becomes a reality, you can truly say, He may not come when you want Him, but He's always. I like what He said here. The Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for what? For what? Him. Let me give you two perspectives on waiting, and then we'll be through tonight. First perspective of waiting. What does it mean to wait? Well, when you go to the New Testament, we really don't have time, but the first perspective on waiting is what is called long suffering. Long suffering. Long suffering is a gift of the Spirit, and it's critical to God. Long suffering is the ability to deal with difficult people. It has a reference to others. That's patient, patient with others. If it took God 50 some years to get your life straight, why does He have to wave a magic wand to somebody else? We have to learn how to be patient, and especially as we deal with people, as we relate to people, we have to be long suffering. Read the life of Jesus and see if some of the things he suffered, you would have been able to put up with. He knew that Judas was going to betray him, but he still tried to minister with him. Most of the time, when we know that somebody's going to hurt us and trying to hurt us, guess what? We going to hurt you before you hurt us. Me. I'm going to do unto you before you get a chance to do it unto me. That's how we operate. We won't say nothing. I'm not going to ask you to witness to that. But basically, that's God is saying, I'm looking for people who will be long suffering. An old preacher said this to me. I will never forget it. He said, if you're going to make an error, make it on the side of grace. Lord, I made a mistake, but I was trying to be gracious because you've been gracious to me. That stops you from condemning people. Because if the truth is told, I'm talking about being patient. Being patient. It's not going to happen overnight. God is not going to fill these chairs up overnight, but He's wanting patience, patience with people. That's one aspect of patience. And if you can't be patient with others, the faults and the faults of other people, and being patient with the failures of other people, then God can't use you. You can't, not in His program, because you're going to have to be patient. In the Garden of Eden, when they came to get Jesus, Judas kissed Jesus And the next thing you know, Peter pulled his sword out. Maybe one of these Sundays, I'm going to get a handful of swords, and everybody come through the door, I'm going to give them a sword. But the Lord told Peter, what? Put your sword up. Put your sword up. How can you heal people when you're always hurting them? They gonna hurt you. Why? Because hurt people hurt people. And if you're gonna be a minister, if you're gonna be a witness for the Lord, expect it. They're gonna hurt you. I grew up in a family, and I was taught this from a child. Somebody hurt you, you treat them with a long handle spoon. What does that mean? They'll never get close to you again. I did that. Young pastor, I did that. And then the Lord spoke to me. How can you minister to people when they can't get close to you? The shepherd ought to smell like the sheep. If the shepherd don't smell like the sheep, it's something wrong. One aspect of patience. Other aspects of patience is the ability to endure hardness. Bear hardness as a good soldier. Bear it. Persevere. It ain't time, church, to throw in and raise the white flag. It's not time to throw in the towel. God is saying, I'm looking for a strong people who can bear the burdens in the heat of the day. And there's far too many people who become so discouraged they quit. I'm not saying that. I know in my notes I have they become captives to discouragement, captives to despondency and depression. I'm not saying you're not going to be depressed. I can't tell you how many times I'm depressed. But when I come to this church and I've got to preach the gospel, the good news of Jesus, I cannot afford. And if I got to do it, guess who else? I'm not by myself. You do too. You've got to manage. You've got to manage this. I'm not saying you're not going to be down. I'm not saying that you're not going to be full of sorrow, but you cannot let that stuff manage you. You've got to manage it. That's why one of my favorite verses is Romans 12:21. Overcome evil with good. That's the sign of a mature Christian. What does it mean to wait? Trust. Trust God. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I trust him. I trust him. If it's death, it's time for me to go. If it's life, that's exactly what Paul said in the book of Philippians to the believers at Philippi. He said, for me to live is Christ. But if he chose for me to die, it's my gain. So he left me here, Paul said, so I can preach and teach to you. I just trust him. He's going to do the right thing. How many of y'all trust him like that? How many of y'all love him like that? How many of you have patience like that? Just to put your trust totally and completely upon him. Satan has tried to take me out at least 3 times, but I'm still here. Well, it's time to end. We thank God for your presence this evening. I pray we didn't get through the entire lesson, got to the first verse and stopped there. But I pray that you did get something out of this. Hope in God. Put your hope in. Don't let Satan, don't let difficult circumstances steal your hope. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Don't let him have your hope. That's exactly what the Lord meant when he told Satan, you can touch everything, but don't you touch his soul. Y'all didn't get that, did you? Say, take his car, take his health, but don't touch his soul. By show of hands, how many of y'all still got hope? God bless you this evening, and may God keep you.